Hey everybody, I'm Kyle Ingham with The Distilled Man, and today we're going to be speaking with author Paul Angone about navigating your 20s. And Paul runs the website allgrownup.com, which is a resource and community for 20-somethings struggling with that question of what now. He's also the author of the best-selling book 101 Secrets for Your 20s. And today we're going to be talking with him about his new book, All Grown Up, Searching for Self, Faith, and a Freaking Job. Love that. Paul, thanks so much for joining me, and congrats on the new book.
Hey, thanks, Kyle. Thanks for having me. I think we can pretty much shut it down after the intro. I think that's probably the best part right there.
That's as good as it's going to get, right?
That's as good as it gets. I might as well just leave the room after that. But no, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah. So you've been kind of compared to that older, wiser brother who's been there before, and you can kind of relate to the struggles of the 20-somethings, and particularly the millennial generation. So
Sure.
I want to kind of get into why you wrote this book. Why is being in your 20s such a difficult decade? And is this whole quarter life crisis that we keep hearing about, is this a real thing?
Gosh, yeah. I got passionate about this topic and started really writing about it because I failed so miserably after I left college and kind of, the typical kind of cocky guy thing, probably. I was pretty arrogant, thinking I'm going to go make a big difference. And if not make a big difference, I'm going to make a lot of money. And if I didn't make a lot of money, at least do a job that sounded cool. And if at least didn't sound cool, at least a job I could enjoy, and all this kind of the mental checklist, right? And none of that happened. I mean, I was, as I talk about in the book, I was, interviewing to be a used airplane parts sales assistant, and pretty freaked out about it because
Yeah.
I started realizing that you could actually fly around in planes that are using used airplane parts.
Right.
And that was a pretty big, I was like, that seems wrong to me. I don't want to be going to like the junkyard and finding my airplane's wings. And how can I sell that to people? And what in the heck am I doing with my life?
Yeah.
So that's when I started really seeing that firsthand of, gosh, this is not straightforward. And, I've been taking all these linear steps my whole life, middle school, high school, college, pick the right major, and whatever it might be for, everybody's path is different. But I think we all keep climbing those steps because it's like, once you get up there, once you reach the, 15th floor, that's when you're going to be successful. That's when you're going to open up the door and you're going to reap all the sweet benefits that you've been working for. And when I got up there, I felt like they had somehow like tricked me, and I ended up back in the basement, and it was all these locked doors, and it was dark and dingy, and it was like a Stephen King movie, not like a dream come true where I'm walking into like the Google headquarters and they're offering me a VP position. So that was my personal story that then led me into this, and I started diving in more. Your question about the quarter life crisis, I do think it's a very stark transition nowadays as we're entering into kind of, okay, you got to figure out the rest of your life. There's a lot of big questions, a lot of big decisions that's going to kind of set the course for your career, for relationships, for faith, whatever it might be. And that's intense.
Yeah, the stakes are pretty high, aren't they?
The stakes are pretty
Yeah.
high, right? So like, you have a book like The Defining Decade, which has been a popular one by Meg Jay. She had a great
So funny.
TED
I have
Talk.
it right over there too. I should
There
have
you
had
go.
it in my
There you
hand.
go.
Yeah.
So, and she talks about how your major life decisions are all happening in the 20s. That's the defining decade,
Right.
and I really think there's truth in that, and I think there's so much pressure. There's so
Yeah.
much pressure not to blow it.
Right. And is there more? Do you feel like there's more pressure now? I mean, because I think in some ways the millennials get a bad rap, but
Yeah.
they're very entitled. I mean, I think you even sort of allude to that in your book. You say something like, what is it? We don't know how to fail, and even when we do fail, we're pretty sure we actually won. Kind of that
Yes.
whole urban legend of the kid who wins 7th place and wants to get a trophy or whatever.
That whole thing.
But it seems like there are other real challenges that are different from other
Yeah.
generations. I mean, can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
Yeah, I always ebb and flow into kind of being okay, here's some things we could possibly be doing better. But then also like, these stereotypes and these generalizations are they're really not that accurate. And
Right.
we're trying to label, 90 million people with a study of like 500 people in
Yeah.
a Time magazine cover article. And now everybody knows who millennials are.
Right.
And I'm like, well,
Just because you were born in these years, you are exactly the same.
Just because, and even the dates differ depending on who you're asking, right? But typically I see like 1980 to 2000, and it's like that's a 20-year range, and the amount of change that happened in there. I'm an older millennial.
Yeah.
I'm 31 now.
Yeah.
Gosh, and just the amount of change that I saw, where I didn't have I didn't know what email was until I was in college, really, or cell phones, and what the kids are growing up with today, and I'm calling them kids now, I'm 31, so I'm calling them kids. How old am I now?
Those kids.
those dang kids, those ragamuffins running around with their low-hanging pants. But yeah, I do think, to actually go back to your question and actually try to answer it, I do think there's some unique challenges that this generation is experiencing because we grew up in a time and a place where, especially for all of us that grew up in the 90s where things were booming, it's like everything you touch turned to gold. A lot of us maybe had successful parents financially, maybe we didn't see our parents that much, or maybe there was divorce or other problems, but they were making a lot of money while they were doing it. Right. And companies were making a lot of money. Maybe there were some other problems with the companies, the Enrons, and there's some other shady stuff going on. So it was kind of like all this stuff was building up, this thing that we saw explode. And then you have a generation that's now entering the workforce with a bunch of debt from their liberal arts education or wherever they thought was going to be their golden ticket. And then they enter the world with their history degree or their English degree or even their political science or whatever, and then they realize that the world is not exactly welcoming them with open arms.
And that actually brings up another side point that, I don't know what the stats are, and you probably don't either, but it's something like the way that just the cost of college has gone up in the last few, 10, 20 years. It's that it used to be that anyone could almost afford college if you had the smarts. And now if you're lucky enough to get into college and be able to afford it, you still get out with, $50,000, $40,000 of debt.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. I've seen some with 75, 80,000. I used to work at a school where people would start getting grad degrees and would have 3 or 4 grad degrees. And they would never stop because they were continually trying to put their other loans in deferment. So they just were always going to school, trying to I'll just go to school until I die so I don't have to pay back my $125,000 in loans now. So, it's surpassed the mortgage debt. I mean, it's surpassing credit card debt. I mean, it's the highest. It's kind of that next bubble, right? And that's a whole nother conversation. But it's another built up kind of platform that's like, this is unsustainable. And now you have millennials that are entering a workforce that baby boomers really aren't leaving yet. And so it has been that mixture of, okay, I was kind of told that I could go and pursue my dreams or go be successful, or if I get this degree and I could keep checking off the right boxes, I'll do it. And I think for a lot of us, we realized pretty quickly, like, that's not really the case. Yeah. So we had to figure out a new way to be successful, a new strategy. And that's kind of what I'm talking about in All Grown Up, is those expectations being blown apart and then kind of figuring out, okay, what now? What next? Yeah,
I think that idea of expectations just is such a strong thread throughout the book. There's actually another quote I wanted to read, the MacGyver quote. I don't know if you remember this, but
sure.
Because it just really spoke to me. Yeah. One, being a fan of MacGyver, and two, kind of going through this on my own.
I knew I liked you, Kyle, and now there's more reason why.
So let's see. Here it is. It's kind of a long one. I think,
sure.
And this is about, I think, you and your roommate at the time.
Yeah, my roommate Micah, and we're both just failing at life and supporting each other while we're doing it.
Right. So I think we were both hoping our lives would turn out like one of MacGyver's inventions. 1 part piece of wire, 1 part old helicopter engine, 1 part broken tennis racket used by a Soviet spy who was really good at tennis, that MacGyver, under immense pressure, would tie all together with 2 seconds to spare, saving himself and a Vietnam village. I laughed so hard when I read that because I could totally relate to it. And then this actually, I think, is really representative of, you're just so funny in the book. Like some of these... Thanks. You kind of go out there a little bit, and I love you go off on these little like hilarious analogy tangents, but I think it makes it really fun.
Thank you.
But one thing I want to ask is, I mean, because I think you kind of go back and forth in terms of expectations in your book, because on one hand, there's the idea of not setting or realizing maybe that expectations are too high or unrealistic. On the other hand, I think your story is about one of still kind of going after your dream. And
Yeah.
I guess my question is, and I think a lot of people would want to know is there an appropriate balance between
Yeah.
swinging for the fences, but also kind of, being prepared to strike out?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great way to put it.
And you kind
And
of
I,
did that, I feel like. So I don't,
yeah, and yeah, both of us, we were even talking before the interview how
yeah,
we've had a similar story of kind of going back and forth between like, okay, I'm going all in, this is the time, this is it.
yeah,
I'm gonna do this, watch out everybody. And then, after a couple of years it doesn't work out.
yeah.
And you're like, oh crap. Gosh,
Wah, wah,
am I
wah,
gonna,
wah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
music starts, I say it's kind of the long walk on the pier to violin music in the fog.
Yeah.
This kind of come to Jesus moment, and you're
Yeah.
like, okay, well, I got to start over.
Yeah.
Apparently that plan wasn't the right plan. I got to adapt and change and grow and figure out a new plan. And so I guess that's what I started realizing when I'm starting to kind of check my expectations was this idea that it's not going to work out the first time, and it's not going to work out the second time, and it might not work out the third time. The end result might not be there, but there are going to be a lot of successes along the way that end in a failed result.
Right.
But it's all those small successes that you're building upon, gaining the skill set that you would never had if you wouldn't have just pursued something, if you wouldn't
Right.
have started. And so that was the thing that I realized is that, I had all these failed end results, but I was still learning, I was still growing, I was still changing, and that brought a lot of value. And so I was able to do a lot with that. So it's kind of those unmet expectations and unrealistic
Right.
expectations. But then also we should have some unrealistic
Right.
expectations because you're not going to do anything that remotes to any kind of change in this world
Right. Right.
if you don't have some unrealistic expectations.
Right.
But then when it doesn't work out like you thought, then saying, okay, that's fine. Let me figure out a new plan.
Yeah, almost changing the way that you see your pursuit to your dream. And I think you even talk a little bit about this when you talk about having to rewrite your manuscript. And I've just felt, I haven't written a manuscript, but I just felt that pain of, oh,
Yeah.
it's done, send it out. It's going to be bestseller. And then
Yeah.
you're like, well, you were on your path to your dream, but it was a painful path because you actually
Yeah.
had to, you're rewriting it and dealing with critical feedback, and it was
Yeah.
not glamorous, I guess.
No, no, it's not. And you really realize that pretty quickly too, right? I mean, we probably are both the same way. This kind of unsexy truth
Yeah.
to chasing a dream. What we portray on the internet as we're pursuing the dreams, as we're on Facebook or whatever, it's all kind of the sexiness, the
Right.
appeal of the chase and the hustle and the wins and the victories. We're not really sharing the moments where you're just flat out on the couch. Maybe you've drank a few beers and you're wondering, have I made the biggest mistakes of my life trying to pursue this? And my book was one of those where this new book, All Grown Up, it literally took me 10 years to see happen.
Wow.
And within that 10 years was a lot of, okay, it's finally going to happen. I'm waiting for that one yes. Oh, crap, more failure.
Right.
Okay, let
Right.
me pick it back up again, send it to publishers. I finally finished. Oh, gosh, I just am now getting 10 pages of constructive criticism.
Right.
It's like a bomb blowing up in my face as I'm reading it of these bullet points of everything they hate about the book.
Right.
They hate about my mom. They hate about what I was wearing while I was writing the book. Just feeling like I don't know if I can string a sentence together without people hating it and having to start over again. So it is that's the metaphor for me that I think is true for a lot of us. It's that writing pages, writing maybe 2,000 pages to be able to weed it down, edit, get stuff thrown away, to get down to the 200 pages that you really needed, but you only could get there if you wrote the 2,000.
Right.
And it sucks and it's hard and I wish it was easier. And for some chosen few, maybe it is, but I think for a lot of us, it's not.
And it seems like in some ways it's because you're comparing, actually it reminds me of a quote, I don't know if you'll relate to this, but it's something like, don't compare your messy backstage with someone's, put together front stage production or something like that.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think this whole comparison thing, I think you talk a little bit about it. I think you call it the new OCD, the
Yes.
Obsessive Comparison Disorder.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that and why that's something maybe particularly afflicting millennials.
Man, it's a killer, right? I mean, it literally you can like go to the grocery store and you're excited and you're like, I'm a real adult. I have my grocery list. I'm actually buying kale and arugula and I'm actually going to use it. I
The
know what these
same
things are
same
now.
same salad?
Yeah, well, maybe, you're getting crazy. You're a real adult. Radishes, whatever. I'm not going to eat cereal tonight. I'm going to do this.
Right.
And you like jump in the grocery aisle and you're in the back of the line, feeling great. Then you jump on your phone, because of course we can't have any awkward moments anymore
Right.
of waiting in a grocery aisle. So we got to jump on our phone,
Right.
start checking Facebook. Oh, look at my buddy. He's promoted VP. Oh, look at that buddy. Oh, they bought a new
Oh,
house. Oh,
yeah.
he's driving a new BMW. Where's that box of wine and the bag of M&Ms? And I'm not going to eat kale. Throw this crap away.
Right.
Because you feel like crap by the time you reach
You
the
want
front of the line.
immediate gratification is what you want, right?
Yeah, it's just gone. All
Yeah.
that feeling. So I think about it. In the past, you used to have to wait till like your 10-year reunion to check everybody out to see who's
Right.
doing better than everybody, and you just had to fake it for one night, right?
Right.
You used to have to, you rent the car. Maybe you rent a spouse, you rent some kids if you need to, the really good looking ones, whatever it takes.
Right.
And you just fake it for one night. And
Right.
then you can take off the toupee and you can go back to your normal life.
Right.
But now I feel like we're having to fake it in a way every day. And a lot of us are feeling like we're putting these PR spins on
Right.
our social media profiles, trying to make our lives sound maybe better than they are. And I do think it's blocking some of that authentic conversation with each other, where we finally realize like, hey, wow, you're struggling like I am, and you don't have it figured out either. And so I get so many emails from 20 somethings that write me and say, oh my gosh, thank God I'm not alone. I felt so alone in this. I thought I was the only one struggling. Thank you for open. And that like breaks my heart because I know that feeling, and I think it's a really dangerous one.
Yeah.
That obsessive comparison disorder, this new OCD, really blocks us from saying, okay, we all have crap that we're trying to wrap up in a pretty little bow, but it all stinks. So let's like get it out and talk about it, and then move on.
Yeah, in some ways and you kind of alluded to this, it is because of technology. In some ways we've all become publishers on a daily basis, like our Facebook
Yeah.
status. And there's actually a quote that I really liked that in your book, you talked about your, I don't have the quote handy, but you talk about your grandfather thinking about, and I think you do this a couple times in the book where you kind of go back to get a perspective from an older person. And I think the way
Yeah.
that you kind of juxtapose it with your journey is interesting. And you talk about how your grandpa, went to a mill 7 days a week or for 30 years and
Yeah.
never had to, and this really struck me, never had to check his Gmail when he was supposed to be on the line or whatever. And I just thought that's so true because,
Yeah.
now we have even our recreation while we're, even the way that we, slack off is different than,
Yeah.
previous generations. It's almost more intense or something that, technology has made it harder for us to just be,
Yeah,
you
and
know?
totally. That's a great way to put it. The just being part.
Right.
And I really think that's the case, that we're always, and I know this is not a new concept, and we're wrestling with this, but this idea that we're so overwhelmed with possibilities, and if we're doing one thing, we know we're not doing 50 other
Right.
things. And
Right.
we're so aware of that fact now. It's like I'll jump on Pandora, right? Or or Spotify or whatever, and I'm listening to a song and I like that song, but I'm like, I'm not quite in the mood for that exact song. Let me jump to a different station,
Right.
And if that song would have come up on the radio in my car, I would have been so excited.
Right.
But because I felt like I could control it and hone it and fine tune it, and I think that's kind of the metaphor for us, is that we're so just like, how can I fine tune this moment to
Right.
make it better?
Right.
Or how can I fine tune, and I think, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and in my own life, is I'm distracting myself in everything I do. So it's like when I'm driving to work or whatever, I'm stuck in traffic, I'm putting on music to distract myself from the drive.
From the drive.
When
Right.
I'm at work, I'm jumping on Facebook or email and putting on music to distract myself from work. When I'm working out, let's get in front of a TV so we can watch TV, so we don't really realize that we're working out. And it's like, well, when am I distracting myself from like 95% of my life? And is there a problem with that? Versus like my grandpa with his lunch
Right.
pail, walking in the mill, and he had his own problems, he had his own stuff he had to deal with. But gosh, yeah, he wasn't thinking about the world's problems. He was focused on where he was at right now. And I do think that can become a problem that there's just so much. There's so much, and we just don't know what to do with it all.
Yeah, in some ways, I mean, I don't want to have to say they had it easy because they had it much harder than we did, back then
Yeah,
in many ways. But in
yeah,
terms of choice, I mean, like you said, they had it easy. Another detour that I love in your book is when, I don't know if it's a detour, but it was unexpected for me, is
sure.
when, and not without giving too much away, but you start doing this project where you're filming people in an old folks home, and I just thought,
Yeah.
whoa, where did that come from? I did not see that coming, but it was such a cool little detour. And can you talk a little bit about, there were two guys, Candido and Roy, and they were giving you career advice. I just thought this was so funny.
Yeah, that's I thank you for bringing that up. That was probably one of more of my funny and it was funny. I put and we can give it all away. I give the whole book away. I don't care
It's
people.
like,
I just hope.
sorry, spoiler alert, he
Yeah,
goes
that's
to an
totally
old
fine.
folks
No,
home.
I decided to have this idea of okay, I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. So my whole theme was, well, I'm gonna go to, like you would flip a book open and you would flip it to the end to
Right.
figure out what happens. And so I'm like, well, let me do that. Let me go and flip this book to the end. I'm gonna go and speak to people at the end of their story to figure out some truth from my beginning. Yeah, so I go and I try to make a documentary of living with the elderly, and going and doing that. I wanted to figure out, I wanted to basically talk to my grandpa again, that I couldn't anymore. He'd passed away. So I wanted to go and reap that wisdom from those who had seen a different era and figure out, okay, what truths can I pull in? And that's when I started figuring out some things like, even talking to a guy named Roy who used to play for the New York Yankees. He fought in World War II, just this amazing guy, and he had so much peace about him. There wasn't this
Yeah.
frantic anxiety I
Right.
was experiencing every day. And he just talked about how he loves to go to the park with his dog, and he just finds so much contentment in the mundane of everyday life. And I yearned for that. And I think as a generation, we're always looking to make that big difference or big impact or make a lot of money. It's always got to be big. It's a billboard moment. It's got to be something I can brag about. And then you quickly learn, like, gosh,
Worthy of like an true Hollywood story type of,
exactly, like it's got to be a mini series, or it's got to be social media worthy.
right.
That's the lens we're seeing everything through.
Right.
And then you talk to somebody like Roy, and none of that stuff matters, and he just finds so much contentment, and he was able to do so much because he was able to do the small things really well.
Right.
And so I learned the hard way. It was kind of that reality check again for me of, gosh, I'm always thinking about doing some big thing, but honestly, that big thing would have just crushed me. I wouldn't have been able to handle it because
Right.
I'm doing a terrible job at the small things. So what makes me think that I can make a big difference when I'm blowing it in the small details?
Right. Well, I think that's one thing it's so great, great about your story and I guess it's a memoir, I guess is really what it is it's so
Yeah,
relatable. And so many of us kind of go through that in our 20s. One thing I wanted to ask you about is, a lot of people say writing about their experiences changes or maybe solidifies their thoughts on it. I'm curious to know for you if writing about your 20s kind of helped you kind of wrap them up in neat little packages for yourself in terms of what you took away, or if it maybe, I don't know, changed things.
yeah, that's a good question. A really interesting question. There was one point when I was writing about things as I was living it and living it as I was writing it. I almost couldn't separate the two.
Wow.
It was almost like the book was my life and my life was my book. And it was like it was almost like a running journal. And that's really how it started. It was me just trying to make sense of things.
Right.
And I'm traveling around for a sales job, staying in these crappy hotels, and being like, either I watch another rerun of Friends and eat another Snickers bar, or I just start trying to make sense of life. And that's what I started doing. So I call writing this book, All Grown Up, the best and the worst thing to ever happen to me, because it does. And I encourage everybody to write
Yeah.
their own story or at least journal or something, because it does force you to think about things that maybe we're putting off on the back burner. It's like, well, I'll get to that later, or I'll ask myself those hard questions some other time after I watch the seventh season of The Walking Dead or whatever.
So
You
true.
know,
So
and
true.
and and it forces you to, okay, I got to put words to this.
Yeah.
or I'm just going to have a blank page.
Right, right. Well, no, it's been awesome chatting with you, and I really enjoyed the book. So just to kind of wrap things up, I wanted to ask you two questions. So I know a lot of our listeners who are, they're in their 20s and they're thinking, well, this all sounds great, but where do I start? So I wanted to ask you, what's one thing you could tell 20-somethings to stop doing now, and then one thing that they could start doing just to kind of get going?
Gosh, one thing that's tough. How do I hone it down here? I think one thing to stop doing is to stop wishing. I think that kind of that mountaintop moment would happen, or that things would magically become easier. Kind of that wishing for, gosh, if only this one thing could happen. If only my parents could help me out more, or if only I could get that one job. Kind of that if only
Right.
thing.
I know that one miracle
and it's
thing.
just like that. Once that changes, then I'm really gonna do good work.
Right.
Once that thing happens, then I really will step in and learn and grow. And we're always kind of waiting for that if only moment. And then you realize even if that does happen, you reach the mountaintop, and then it's like, well, gosh, what do I do up here? You can't live on top of the mountain. You just head back down.
Look for another mountain.
So we miss all those steps along the way. So I would say that's one thing to stop doing. Stop waiting for that if only moment, because that if only moment's never going to happen. And even if it does, it's not going to be what we thought it should be. One thing to start doing right now is I would start asking yourself some of those hard questions. And that's a lot of things, because there's a lot of questions within that. And there's different articles that you have on your website, Kyle, that I have on my website that can help process that. But it's not, it's being intentional about your life. It's really asking yourself, what do I want out of my life? In 20 years, where do I want to be? Not that I'm going to have a straightforward plan to get there, but just where do I see myself? And then let me work back and figure out, okay, what step do I need to take now? And let me just do it, and just go and do something and fail and have it be messy and have it not work out, but try going for something bigger that you don't feel capable of. And if you don't feel capable of doing it, then you're probably on the right track.
I love that. That's so perfect. Paul, thank you again for chatting with me, and best of luck with the new book. So the book is all grown up, searching for self, faith, and a freaking job. So everyone out there should go and buy it. I'll have the link below here. And thanks again, everyone, for watching. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Kyle, for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much.